The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. Book 4, The Red Dragon, 7. The road from Winchester to Caerleon is a good one, and the weather was fine and dry, so we did not halt in Sarum, but held on northwards, while the night lasted, straight across the great plain. The way beyond Sarum, a short way beyond Sarum, lies the place where Ambrosius was born. I cannot call to mind now what name it had gone by in the past, but already it was being called by his name, Ambersburg or Amesbury. I had never been that way, and had a mind to see it, so we pressed on and arrived just before sunset. I, together with the officers, was given comfortable lodging with the head man of the town. It was little more than a village, but very conscious now of its standing as the king's birthplace. Not far away was the spot where, many years ago, some 100 or more British nobles had been treacherously massacred by the Saxons and buried in a common grave. This place lay some way west of Amesbury, beyond the stone circle that men call the Giant's Dance, or the Dance of the Hanging Stones. I had long heard about the dance, and had been curious to see it, so when the troop reached Amesbury, and were preparing to settle in for the night, I made my excuses to my host and rode out westwards, along over the open plain. Here, for mile on mile, the long plain stretches, without hill or valley, unbroken save for clumps of thorn trees and gorse, and here and there a solitary oak, stripped by the winds. The sun sets late, and this evening, as I rode my tired horse slowly westwards, the sky ahead of me was still tinged with the last rays, while behind me in the east the clouds of evening piled slate blue, and one early star came out. I think I had been expecting the dance to be much less impressive than the ranked armies of stones I had grown accustomed to in Brittany, something, perhaps, on the scale of the circle on the Druids' Island, but these stones were enormous, bigger than any I had ever seen, and their very isolation, standing as they did in the centre of that vast and empty plain, struck the heart with awe. I rode some of the way round, slowly, staring, then dismounted, and, leaving my horse to graze, walked forward between two standing stones of the outer circle. My shadow, thrown ahead of me between their shadows, was tiny, a pygmy thing. I paused involuntarily, as if the giants had linked hands to stop me. Ambrosius had asked me if this had been an arrow out of the dark. I had told him yes, and this was true, but I had yet to find out why I had been brought here. All I knew was that now I was here, I wished myself away. I had felt something of the same thing in Brittany as I first passed among the avenues of stone, a breathing on the back of the neck as if something older than time were looking over one's shoulder. But this was not quite the same. It was as if the ground, the stones that I touched, though still warm from the spring sunlight, were breathing cold from somewhere deep below. Half reluctantly I walked forward. The light was going rapidly, and to pick one's way into the centre needed care. Time and storm, and perhaps gods of war, had done their work, and many of the stones were cast down to lie haphazard, but the pattern could still be discerned. It was a circle, but like nothing I had seen in Brittany, like nothing I had even imagined. There had been, originally, an outer circle of the huge stones, and where a crescent of these still stood, I saw that the uprights were crowned with a continuous lintel of stones, as vast as themselves, a great linked curve of stone, standing like a giant's fence across the sky. Here and there, others of the outer circle were still standing, but most had fallen or were leaning at drunken angles, with the lintel stones beside them on the ground. Within the bigger circle was a smaller one of uprights, and some of the outer giants had fallen against these and brought them flat. Within these again, marking the centre, was a horseshoe of enormous stones, crowned in pairs. 3 of these trilthons stood intact. The 4th had fallen and brought its neighbour down with it. Echoing this once again was the inner horseshoe of smaller stones, nearly all standing. The center was empty and crossed with shadows. The sun had gone, and with its going the western sky drained of color, leaving one bright star in a swimming sea of green. I stood still. It was very quiet, so quiet that I could hear the sound of my horse cropping the turf, and the thin jingle of his bit as he moved. The only other sound was the whispering chatter of nesting starlings among the great trill thorns overhead. The starling is a bird sacred to druids, and I had heard that in the past time the dance had been used for worship by the druid priests. There are many stories about the dance, how the stones were brought from Africa and put up by giants of old, or how they were giants themselves, caught and turned to stone by a curse as they danced in a ring. But it was not giants or curses that were breathing the cold air now from the ground and from the stones. These stones had been put here by men, and their raising had been sung by poets, like the old blind man of Brittany. A lingering shred of light caught the stone near me. The huge knob of stone on one sandstone surface echoed the hole in the fallen lintel alongside it. These tenons and sockets had been fashioned by men, craftsmen such as I had watched almost daily for the last few years in West Britain, then in York, London, Winchester, and massive as they were, giants building as they seemed to be. They had been raised by the hands of workers, to the commands of engineers, and to the sound of music such as I had heard from the blind singer of Carrick. I walked slowly forward across the circle center, the faint light of the western sky threw my shadow slanting ahead of me, and etched momentarily in fleeting light the shape of an axe, two-headed on one of the stones. I hesitated and then turned to look. My shadow wavered and dipped. I trod in a shallow pit and fell, measuring my length. It was only a depression in the ground, the kind that might have been made years past by the falling of one of the great stones, or by a grave. There was no stone nearby of such a size, no sign of digging, no one buried here. The turf was smooth and grazed by sheep and cattle, and under my hands, as I picked myself up slowly, were the scented frilled stars of daisies. But as I lay, I had felt the cold strike up from below, in a pang as sudden as an arrow striking, and I knew that this was why I had been brought here. I caught my horse, mounted, and rode the 2 miles back to my father's birthplace. We reached Caerleon 4 days later to find the place completely changed. Ambrosius intended to use it as one of his 3 main stations along with London and York. And Tremorinus himself had been working there. The walls had been rebuilt, the bridge repaired, the river dredged and its banks strengthened, the whole of the East Berwick block rebuilt. In earlier times, the military settlement at Caerleon, circled by low hills and guarded by a curve of the river, had been a vast place. There was no need for even half of it now. So Tremorinus had pulled down what remained of the western Berwick blocks and used the material on the spot to build the new quarters, the baths, and some brand new kitchens. The old ones had been in even worse condition than the bathhouse at Moradunham, and now you'll have every man in Britain asking to be posted here, I told Tremorinus, and he looked pleased. We'll not be ready a moment too soon, he said. The rumor's going round of fresh trouble coming. Have you heard anything? Nothing. But if it's recent news, I wouldn't have had it. We've been on the move for nearly a week. What kind of trouble? Not Octa again, surely. No, Percentus. This was Vortimir's brother, who had fought with him in the rebellion and fled north after Vortimir's death. You knew he took the ship to Germany. They say he'll come back. Give him time, I said. You may be sure he will. Well, you'll send me any news if he comes. You'll send me any news that comes.
Send you? You're not staying here?
No, I'm going to Moradunham. It's my home, you know.
I had forgotten. Well, perhaps we'll see something of you. I'll be here myself a bit longer. We've started work on the church now.
He grinned.
The bishop's been at me like a gadfly. It seems I should have been thinking of that before I spent so much time on the things of the earth. And there's talk, too, of putting up some kind of monument to the king's victories, a triumphal arch, some say, the old Roman style of thing. Of course, they're saying here in Caerleon that we should build a church for that, the glory of God with Ambrosius thrown in. Though myself, I think any bishop should get the credit of God's glory. I think if any bishop should get the credit of God's glory and the king's combined, it should be Gloucester. Old Eldad laid about him with the best of them. Did you see him?
I heard him.
He laughed. Well, in any case, you'll stay tonight, I hope. Have supper with me?
Thanks, I'd like to. We talked late into the night, and he showed me some of his plans and designs, and seemed flatteringly anxious that I should come back from Moradunham to see the various stages of the building. I promised, and next day left Caerleon alone, parrying an equally flattering and urgent request from the camp commandant to let him give me an escort, but I refused, and in the late afternoon came alone at last in sight of my own hills. There were rain clouds massing in the west, but in front of them, like a bright curtain, the slanting sunlight. One could see on a day like this why the green hills of Wales had been called the Black Mountains, and the valleys running through them the valleys of gold. Bars of sunlight lay along the trees of the golden valleys, and the hills stood slate blue or black behind them, with their tops supporting the sky. I took 2 days for the journey, going easily, and noticing by the way how the land seemed already to have got back its bloom of peace. A farmer building a wall barely looked my way as I rode by, and a young girl minding a flock of sheep smiled at me, and when I got to the mill on the Tywai, it seemed to be working normally. There were grain sacks piled in the yard, and I could hear the clack, clack, clack of the turning wheel. I passed the bottom of the path which led up to the cave, and held on straight for the town. I believe I told myself that my first duty and concern was to visit St. Peter's, to ask about my mother's death, and see where she was buried. But when I got from my horse at the nunnery gate and lifted a hand to the bell, I knew from the knocking of my heart that I had told myself a lie. I could have spared myself the deception. It was the old portress who let me in, and who led me straight, without being asked, through the inner court and down the green slope near the river where my mother was buried. It was a lovely place, a green plot near a wall where pear trees had been brought early into blossom by the warmth, and where, above their snow, the white doves she had loved were rounding their breasts in the sun. I could hear the ripple of the river beyond the wall, and down through the rustling trees the note of the chapel bell. The abbess received me kindly, and had nothing to add to the account which I had received soon after my mother's death, and had passed on to my father. I left money for prayers, and for a carved stone to be made, and when I left, it was with her silver and amethyst cross tucked into my saddlebag. One question I dared not ask, even when a girl who was not Carrie brought wine for my refreshment. And finally, with my question unasked, I was ushered to the gate and out into the street. Here I thought for a moment that my luck had changed, for as I was untying my horse's bridle from the bell beside the gate, I saw the old portress peering at me through the grill, remembering no doubt the gold I had given her on my first visit. But when I produced money and beckoned her close to shout my question in her ear, and even after 3 repetitions got through to her, the only answer was a shrug and one word, "Gone!" which, even if she had understood me, was hardly helpful. In the end I gave it up. In any case, I told myself this was something that had to be forgotten, so I rode out of town and back over the miles of my valley, with the memory of her face burned into everything I saw, and the gold of her hair lying in every shaft of the slanting sunlight. Cadel had rebuilt the pen,
which Gallopus and I had made in the hawthorn brake. It had a good roof and a stout door, and could easily house a couple of big horses. One, Cadle's own, I suppose, was already there. Cadle himself must have heard me riding up the valley, because, almost before I had dismounted, he came running down the path by the cliff, had the bridle out of my hand, and lifting both my hands in his, kissed them. "Why, what's this?" I asked, surprised. He need have had no fear for my safety. The messages I had sent him had been regular and reassuring. "Didn't you get the message I was coming?" "Yes, I got it. It's been a long time. You're looking well."
"And you, is all well here?"
"You'll find it so. If you must live in a place like this, there's ways and ways of making it fit. Now get away up, your supper's ready."
He bent to unbuckle the horse's girths, leaving me to go up to the cave alone. He had had a long time in which to do it, but even so it came with a shock like a miracle. It was as it had always been, a place of green grass and sunlight. Daisies and heartsease starred the turf between the green curls of young bracken, and young rabbits whisked out of sight under the flowering blackthorn. The spring ran crystal clear, and crystal clear through the water as well could be seen the silver gravel at the bottom. Above it, in its ferny niche, stood the carved figure of the god. Cadle must have found it when he cleared the rubbish from the well. He had even found the cup of horn. It stood where it had always stood. I drank from it, sprinkled the drops for the god, and went into my cave. My books had come from Les Britain. The great chest was backed against the wall of the cave, where Gallopus's box had been. Where his table had stood, there was another which I recognized from my grandfather's house. The bronze mirror was back in place. The cave was clean, sweet-smelling, and dry. Cadle had built a hearth of stone, and logs were laid ready across it to light. I half expected to see Gallopus sitting beside the hearth, and on the ledge near the entrance the falcon which had perched there on the night a small boy left the cave in tears. Deep among the shadows above the ledge at the rear was the gash of deeper shadow which hid the crystal cave. That night, lying on the bed of bracken, with the rugs pulled round me, I lay listening, after the dying of the fire, to the rustle of leaves outside the cave, and beyond that, the trickle of the spring. They were the only sounds in the world. I closed my eyes and slept as I had not slept since I was a child. And that's the end of chapter 7.